Hello, friends. Welcome to Experience Data Talk, a show featuring data science leaders and technologists from around the world. My name is Mike Delgado, and this is episode number 122. Today, we're chatting with Greg Pavlik. Greg is the Chief Technology Officer and Senior Vice President of the Oracle Cloud Platform. And he talks with us today about his work leading teams develop the next generation of data management platforms for enterprises. In today's show, Greg shares with us how he is helping his teams balance life and work amid COVID-19. He shares ways Oracle is helping enterprises successfully move to the cloud and why some orgs haven't embraced the cloud yet. Greg talks with us about the importance of asking the right business questions, collecting the right data, and building models to solve business problems. We also talk about the future of data science roles, and Greg talks to us about how he sees data and tech roles evolving over the next 5 to 10 years. And lastly, we talk about what he looks for when he's hiring data scientists to join his team and steps we all need to take if we want to transition from individual contributors into leadership roles. Greg shares a ton of awesome insights in this episode. Here's our conversation. Greg, welcome to Data Talk.
All right. Well, thanks for having me.
How's it been? A lot of us are now working from home. What's your remote working situation like?
Yeah, at Oracle, we basically have everyone outside of essential workers working from home. I spend the day on Zoom, and we're running Zoom or parts of Zoom now on top of the Oracle Cloud as well. So I guess we're literally eating our own dog food. But a lot of meetings, that would have been face-to-face or mostly Zoom meetings. And actually, a lot of what would have otherwise been calls or just email seems to have shifted to Zoom as well. So the nice thing about that is a little bit more direct interaction, a little bit more of a sense of actually talking to somebody's kind of emerged. So there's been kind of an upside, a lot of downside as well. But overall, I'd say efficiency-wise, things have improved, I think, pretty much across the board for myself and our teams. That may be because the boundaries between work and home have become a bit fuzzy. So we'll probably need to do things to checkpoint that. But, all things considered, I think in the tech industry, especially on software related businesses, it's been a disruption, but one that we've been able to navigate quite well.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are struggling with the work-life balance because the computer's right there and it's so easy. Like I'm an early bird, so I get up like at 4 a.m.
Yeah,
and
similar. I'm doing 5, but yeah. I tell you that the one thing I'll say for myself, despite the fact that I'm probably working longer hours, is I'm getting a heck of a lot more exercise than I used to. Between Zoom calls or whatever, I've got kettlebells and all my home exercise stuff is in my office. So I just pick it up and knock out a few sets and then get back to the next meeting, which I wouldn't be doing at the regular office. I'll say that. So
yeah,
that's one of them.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I got to show you my kettlebell.
Okay. Oh, okay. Hold on. Hold on for a sec. I don't know if people will be interested in this or not, but I give you my best one here. It's my Onnit Primal series. I think they are. This is the orangutan.
Oh, that's awesome.
60 pound or so, but I've got a whole series of them. That's the heaviest one, which I've backed off a bit because, if you're not careful form wise and all that, it's pretty heavy.
Yeah, that is really heavy. Gee whiz. That's a really cool one. I've never seen that brand.
Yeah, that's Onnit. They're a company that does a lot of fitness stuff out of Texas. So they're a pretty reliable source for kettlebells and exercise equipment along those lines. Stuff you can do yourself at home.
That's cool. I think
what I'm not doing is collecting a lot of data on it. So it's going to be a poor. This is a poor segue into a discussion on data science and machine learning. Then I'm starting to feel guilty. I gotta get an app hooked up.
Well, I feel like it's essential for keeping our energy up. It's just like doing those little workouts.
For sure. I think generally if you're doing something on a steady basis, you're gonna wind up with a bit more vitality. But I mean, we were talking with the teams internally too, just kind of encouraging them to think through making sure they have a space that's kind of dedicated to work. So there is some way to kind of get into the zone and out of the zone. And then the other one is find some way to make sure you're getting some exercise and stress relief in general. And then the third thing we've been trying to make sure, especially for people with kids, is make sure you got some family time and you actually treat that as kind of sacred. So we've asked teams not to schedule calls, at noon, let people do lunch with their families. or dinner time. Try to avoid calls. Try to get our org as a whole, all hands type stuff we're trying to do in times that are relatively friendly. Now it's a juggling act because we got multiple geos, multiple time zones, so you're never quite sure if you're getting it right. But in the aggregate, I think we're doing an okay job.
That's good. Yeah, it's really hard when you're working with remote teams in different regions because you want to be sensitive to like not messaging them when they should be kind of with their family, not bothering them. So,
Well, yeah, the other problem we used to have with some of the remote teams is, they kind of feel cheated because you're not face to face. They were always
mhm.
remote, and now everybody's remote. So in some ways, I feel like, yeah, there's a little bit of a time balancing that maybe you don't always get right, but in some sense, now we're all in the same boat. And I will say also, just from an exec perspective, our executive team meetings, we used to cluster a lot of them in Seattle, and I'm in the Bay Area, so I'd be up there, maybe every 2-3 weeks. But other times I'd be remote myself. Um, they've gotten a lot more effective for remote participants because
Mm.
everything's sort of been balanced a little bit to consider the fact that people aren't, no one's there, so we kind of got to make it work, in a fully distributed fashion. So I don't know when things are going to get back to quote unquote normal. But I suspect that even when they do, we'll probably be doing a lot more remote,
Yeah.
not just meetings, but business processes overall than we used to.
Yeah, I've been talking to some friends because here in Orange County, they're going to start to, for some businesses, people will be encouraged, like if they want to go into the office,
Yep.
and but of course they'll need to be wearing face masks. And I
Yes.
personally don't like wearing face masks. Like
Yeah.
I put them on when I go to the store, but I
Yep.
can't wait to get in the car and take it off.
Yep. Yeah. No, I hear you. It's face mask. Plus, I understand that for a while there'll still be social distancing within the offices. So, you usually go in to meet with people and kind of talk across a desk or use a whiteboard if you're an engineer or a data scientist. And it seems like a lot of that's not really going to be possible. So that's another thing we're trying to figure out an effective way to move to models where we can do remote whiteboarding and collaboration above and beyond, what you get through a typical PC interface.
I actually really enjoy Zoom and video chats. Like I like look forward to them. But I have a lot of friends who like would rather just be on the phone. Like it's kind of draining.
Yeah, yeah. I think like I say, the nice thing about Zoom as a substitute for the phone is you can see each other, right? On the other hand, if you're introverted, which a lot of people in tech are, having to quote unquote perform or be there visibly is tough. I'll tell you, for me, hardest thing I have is I have a habit, maybe a bad habit, but I think is necessary just to get everything done. I'm doing quite a bit of multitasking. So if somebody's like looking at you and you're trying to answer text on your email and do email simultaneously while you're having a conversation with them, it's a lot harder to get away with it. Now,
Yeah.
that might actually be a good thing, but that's come up quite a bit recently as well.
No, I'm with you. I was telling some people like whenever I'm on like when I was being at the office and be on like on a group phone call, like that was my time to like let's check email, let's like get some stuff done during the phone call and I'll be listening. But now I'm realizing that when I'm on a group video call, like I need to be present, like right there looking at the camera.
Yeah, yeah. So again, maybe that's the way efficiency is going up as well.
Hmm.
So all things considered, I'd rather be in a physical place, but from tech perspective, I think there are some upsides to the way we're working right now.
I was looking on YouTube. I noticed you keynoted quite a bit and spoken at a lot of different conferences. I'm wondering like the like right now like there's obviously you can't have any conferences.
Yeah, yeah. I don't. Well, to see how it plays out. There were some keynotes I was supposed to do, or some conferences I was supposed to speak at that have been canceled. We've been doing a bunch of internal town halls and briefings. Those used to be face to face to a large degree. They've switched entirely to remote. What I've not done yet is, a major event like Open World or Strata or something like that, where no one's actually there. And that I actually enjoy that. Some people get all tense and anxious about doing those conference events. I actually like it because I think the stuff that we're doing is really interesting. because you really have to get up there and not kind of figure things out on the fly. It really gives you a chance to get serious about analyzing what's really happening in the industry or your workspace. So I feel like it's always a good checkpoint. And typically, assuming they go well, you get a lot of feedback and follow-on discussions. We'll see what happens when it's done. It's done remotely. I find that also when you're in a seat in a conference room, you tend to be focused on the conference. We'll see what happens when it's yet another thing on your computer screen that you can choose to ignore or not.
Yeah, like there's certain conferences that I really enjoy going to because I get a chance to like see people again, and
Yep.
I like the social interaction, having meals with people. So that's
Yeah.
going to be the hard thing is like the webinar format.
Yeah, there's something, a lot of times in the conferences too, when if the presenter does a good job summarizing and having a visual representation of the technical aspects, you sort of lose, you're not really staring at the speaker, you're really looking at what he's trying to say. Lots of times I find when you watch it on video form, whoever's doing the videography is like swapping behind a guy prancing around the stage, or maybe, sometimes flash into the content. And that's the part I think people are going to get wrong. It's like, if the important thing is to correlate what they're saying with what they're trying to show you, and whoever's doing it basically, starts swapping around and not letting you really focus on what they're trying to show you at the right time, I think that's when we're going to have some problems. And I suspect there'll be a lot of that because I don't think people are going to want to be looking at, just here's yet another PowerPoint presentation the whole time. Because that's hard to make compelling if you're in a conference setting where you're doing session after session, keynotes, that kind of thing. So I think there's a little bit of art behind that's going to probably need some adjustment.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like there's like definitely like being at a live event, a lot more energy. Like someone's on stage, they're walking around, moving their arms, versus a lot of times with webinars, like people are sitting down, a little bit less energy.
All up in the.
I'm excited about kind of all the innovation that's happening around live video and changes that are happening. I think the things that Facebook, Instagram have done early on with like live streaming with like hearts and kind of instant feedback is like super cool. If we can apply that to like a webinar format, that would be amazing because I can give you instant feedback.
Yep, I think that would be great. Actually, we're using. I use some form of Facebook or Zoom. Seems to be dominating my life, not just at work, but also in off-work activities. It's like community stuff. There's a nonprofit I'm on the board of. We do all our interactions now are through a Facebook Live. The gym I go to, we've got training sessions that are all on Zoom now, pretty much every day. I don't go every day, unfortunately, but they're running their programs pretty well.
That's
so
awesome.
It's neat to see, and I hope some of that stuff persists, especially for if you're in a job where the times can be inconsistent or you have a lot of travel and all that. Being out of pocket basically means you're missing out on a lot. So if there's ways to kind of go back to quote unquote normal, but also allow this bridge to be there, I think it would be actually pretty nice.
I'm curious about like what are some of the things that are like top of mind for you as far as you're a thought leader, you speak at all these different events, keynote speaker. I'm kind of curious about what things are you thinking about right now when it comes to big data, the cloud.
Yeah, so we've been pretty heads down on delivery and in the platform services that we're doing. But the cool thing is the way I guess it mates up with your question is what we're doing is what I always classify as kind of big data done right. So Oracle's focus on the cloud is it was initially around its Gen 2 infrastructure, which was really kind of the quote unquote IaaS layers like storage, compute, networking, et cetera, and bringing in and building a team that had kind of been there, done that had worked on other hyperscale clouds, brought them to successful, production scenarios and scale on the one hand, but when they do the first wave of anything, you make a lot of mistakes. So part of the value prop with OCI for the teams we built out was, hey, come here. We can work through similar problem domains, but you get a chance not only to take advantage of newer hardware and languages and newer networking capabilities, et cetera, but you also have a chance to step back and learn from your mistakes and do it right. Let's look at what other people have done in the industry and where it hasn't worked. And so we've done that, I think, quite successfully at the IaaS tier, which is, I think, why you see companies like Zoom kind of migrating into it, especially powerful at the way we've done our flat networking infrastructure. But when you move up to the data tier, we're really trying to do a lot of the same things. So if you use big data, you mentioned as an example, I had worked for years, about 6 years, at one of the two pure plays in the Hadoop space, and ran most of the company there. And Hadoop, I think, was a powerful evolutionary technology. It was a catalyst for a lot of change in the industry because it opened up a lot of workloads and it opened up the possibility of dealing with data at scale in ways that were either very difficult and much more expensive or just weren't possible, right? On the other hand, his design center was like, okay, we built this thing for crunching, content off the web and producing indexes. And now we've got to start to deal with the kinds of data sets and kinds of problems that a variety of industries are working with, more traditional enterprise stuff, relational models, et cetera. And it really didn't have a clean transition path in that direction. And so what happened in general with the industry is a lot of people, I think, were forward looking. They started to work with Hadoop and really get value out of these use cases, but they struggled along the way. It was like infrastructure was hard to scale, it was hard to stand up. You got to run it all the time, right? So you're paying for your max expected capacity on every node. So you're paying for all those computers, right? Whatever lease you did in your colo. You're also paying for power all the time, right? So you got this wonky infrastructure that was built for something else that wound up costing a fortune to try to maintain and keep stable. And I think we kind of hit two important inflection points probably around 2016. One was that the public cloud started to become mature enough and hardened enough that people were getting more and more comfortable saying, forget about this HDFS thing. I don't want to run that. Just stick it in object storage and I'll do my data lakes at scale, and all the ops and all the data integrity and backup and all that. That's somebody else's problem, right? And oh, by the way, it's a lot cheaper. You only pay for what you use, right? And then the second thing is once people started to move in that direction, you wound up with the realization that, well, the real driver for the scale on hardware was storage more than anything else. Like compute's interesting, right? You're not typically running jobs all the time continuously. There's some cases where you do, but a lot of times people are coming in with ad hoc workloads, batch workloads that maybe run nightly, weekly, monthly, right? And anytime you're not using the compute, you don't want to be paying for it, right? And again, the cost is a sort of hidden form factor because we were running, for example, test clusters at scale in the prior company I was with. My power bill actually dominated my ongoing costs on a month-to-month basis. It's like all that power. In our case, we were running tests around the clock, so we're using a lot of it. But I think for the typical enterprise user, you're looking at something like 15% utilization, 20% utilization, which means 80% waste. And that waste isn't just it's sitting there and you're burning energy. It really is dollars too. You can translate it directly to dollars. So we got to, I think about 2016, people started to make this migration of data sets into the cloud, and that pretty much killed off the Hadoop market. We're headed into more of a slow growth, flatline type phase. I don't think it'll go away. I don't think Hadoop's going to go away for a simple reason. There's still not a great alternative for on-prem, right? So if you haven't made the transition to the cloud, or there's a barrier to cloud utilization, Hadoop may be a viable choice for true big data. You really have scale out requirements within the enterprise. But for I think most companies, most workloads, most enterprises, it's a lot simpler to use the data lake as a model within the cloud and then only use whatever is required for the job at hand while you need it and then release it. So then you get away from this fixed capacity model, you get away from all the resource scheduling and allocation problems, that come up when you have these, finite clusters, and you get the ability to still take advantage of the kind of computational models and efficiencies that were available in the big data world. So, it's not, and it's interesting too. Once you move into that cloud model where you're spinning it up over top of object store, your compute frameworks, you're really not constrained in terms of technologies you can use. You're not dependent on a distribution. It could be that the implementation technology could be entirely behind a service, or it could be something that you're programming, coding against, say like Python or Spark and one of the Spark dialects, and you can take advantage of it at will, right? And that kind of flexibility, especially when you start to bring in data science and machine learning, I think is super important, right? So, for example, on the data science side, I may wind up with a new framework, new algorithms that I wasn't using in the past. Maybe these require GPUs in terms of compute shapes to run them efficiently. On the cloud, no problem. I don't have to go off and buy an appliance, sit it on the side of a cluster, try to copy data back and forth. I grab the compute shapes I need, I use the framework I need, and I'm off to the races, able to run forward with my job. Not quite that simple in reality because you got concerns like security and governance and so forth that vendors really need to continue to advance the ball on as new technologies emerge. But I'd say that that there was a fundamental paradigm shift. So sometimes you hear this like Hadoop is dead, long live Hadoop. It kind of doesn't make any sense to me. I think Hadoop pretty much flatlined. Eventually it'll go away. What's replaced it really is this sort of native integrated machinery around the cloud, and I don't think we'll never go back paradigmatically.
Have you seen? I'm just curious about like. There's all these benefits of being in the cloud. Any sort of resistance or challenges you've talked to leaders at other companies who are maybe holding back from going to the cloud?
Look, how far are we in the migration to cloud? Maybe 10% of the way, right? So let's, it happens to be where things are growing, right? But it's not where everything is. You have all the stuff that we've implemented over the last 40 plus years. And what happens to that? Maybe it migrates to the cloud, maybe not. A lot of that's going to be an economic calculus. There used to be a lot more security and data privacy related concerns. I think those were legitimate questions and things obviously we have to continually pay attention to and continually work on hardening. But I think also that as more companies have moved forward and the bar's been raised in terms of security standards overall, governance and compliance standards all being implemented, include up through like FedRAMP and FedRAMP High. A lot of these questions have sort of been answered, and there's enough of now a baseline that it's safe to do this understanding that the cautions that used to be raised all the time about going to the cloud were, like I say, appropriate for the time, but to a large degree have changed. What's interesting to me is I didn't see things hardening this quickly, honestly. I thought that the cloud platforms and especially around data, sensitive data moving to the cloud, I thought that transition would be maybe starting in 2016, ending in 2026. And I think these days it's the normal starting point.
Why do you think
there's a lot of questions around governance, right? What is the organization doing? It's not so much data security. Can I lock up my data and protect it? If I do the appropriate things, I think there's enough good patterns and understanding of how to approach that problem. How do I track where my data sets are, where they came from, who's allowed to see them? How do I have a lineage map that says that data that originated in systems on-prem but moved to the cloud? I've kept track of it, and I have a responsibility to maybe delete it at some point in time or be accountable to stakeholders within the business or the customer community. I think those are the harder problems now. But the interesting thing about those is they're not new problems in the sense that you still have to do those things even if you're entirely on-prem, right? So cloud introduces another storage bucket or another area of management or governance that you have to look after. But I don't think these are fundamentally new problems. So as long as maybe they've heightened awareness of the importance of it, along with just regulatory, the legal regimes around GDPR and so forth. Really lit a fire under people to start to pay attention to the governance aspects of data management.
Have you found that companies that have moved to the cloud are doing a better job of sharing data internally? Because I know that a big problem with organizations, especially when you have so many different business lines all collecting their own pieces of data, and it needs to be secure. Sometimes we're not good about sharing like what data we have with each other.
Yeah, I no. I don't think the cloud changes that problem. Just like it doesn't change the governance problem. Right now, what I will say is that the notion of having a data catalog available is becoming more ingrained as the right starting point in a cloud migration. And so whenever somebody comes and says, "Hey, I want to do a big data project. How do I get started? What should I use?" I never say, object store alone is your data lake. I would say if you want to build a data lake that is traceable and accountable, and you can avoid this kind of movement toward a data swamp, you got to start with the object store plus the catalog, right? So now you know what data sets are there, who owns the data sets, what they're meant for. You can tag them, if they're sensitive data sets, PII columns, and in your tables, etc. Then you explicitly put that governance layer in place at the start. It makes it a lot easier, right? And then the processes and the pipelines you build around that, they all have to feed into the governance structure. To me, that's pretty much table stakes to do it right. But does that mean everybody's doing it right? No, I would say not. And a lot of times you get people who just do lift and shift, right? Like, well, they moved to the cloud means it was cheaper, more effective, easier for me to move, say, my data warehouse into the cloud, right? Very common pattern. Great, it's a smart thing to do, but doesn't necessarily mean they're going to solve the governance problem in the process. But migration projects as a hook point to start to do governance, right? Seems to me like a really fundamental pattern. Just like to see more customers doing it, consistently. Once we get there to like 90%, 100%, I'll feel pretty good about things.
What sort of teams need to be involved in setting up a good governance structure?
Typically you're going to need to at least, first of all, it depends on the technologies you're using. But let's use data warehouse as an example. You're going to need your DBAs, you're going to need your data stewards, and you probably want to start to coordinate these things when they really become normative programs through an office of chief data officer, right? So it's like once they start to put standards in place, because look, you're going to have a large, let's take a large enterprise. You have a bunch of lines of business, you have a bunch of actors. You're never going to be able to monitor them all and ensure that, and talk to them all and all that. It really needs to become kind of part of a corporate standard. But I think, the chief data officer kind of providing an umbrella role can be pretty powerful. And I think a lot of organizations have really recognized the importance of having a CDO in the, in the executive level of the team over the last years. I mean, most of the large corporations I talk to at this point have somebody who's sitting there as either a chief data architect or a chief data officer.
What about? Because there's still like a lot of companies that don't have CDOs.
Yeah, well, as I say, you asked are most customers applying governance consistently? No, and you can make another role, but I think a centralized role that makes this kind of an enforced set of best practices, I think is the path to go down. Right. So that's one, area where you could put it, because that might, in an organization that has a CDO, they typically have some umbrella responsibilities around data governance. Right. So that's a good hook point. If you don't have it, empower somebody, I guess, is the answer. Titles, don't matter as much as the fact that it gets done.
Are there any any companies you look to that when you look at the way that they're kind of structuring their governance, you're thinking that they're doing a pretty good job?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not sure who's referenceable, so I have to be careful of throwing names out. But we definitely are working with banks. We're working with retailers who I think are doing a good job. Again, doesn't mean they're 100% there. It means they're on the journey to get there. But they're looking at the problem differently. European companies, I think, especially, well, it's not just European companies. The interesting thing with GDPR and also a lot of the data protection rules that have come up out of Europe is that for a global organization, it doesn't make sense to just do it for Europe. It's like impossible to track. Europeans can do stuff in other countries. Data sometimes isn't strictly confined to a simple locality. So what we've seen a lot of times is that global companies look at the tightest regulations, and those kind of become the standards to comply globally, which I think is a good thing. I know a lot of people complained or do complain about some of these regulations, but at the end of the day, I think they've actually made not just incrementally better for consumers or for our data as individuals, but I think they've actually helped organizations do a better job that will make the organizations more efficient and more able to use the data they need. One of the problems we see a lot is organizations, not only they don't share the data set, they don't know what they have. Like, at any kind of senior level, they can't answer the fundamental question of what kind of data do I have and what kind of questions can I successfully ask. So they'll ask people to go off and do these exploratory exercises, and it's hard, right? And same thing, if you look at data science now, if you go back in time, say 6 years ago, right, 7 years ago, I need a data scientist. And people would look at each other and say, like, what's that? Do they even exist? That's changed quite a bit. There's a ton of, people have been cross-training or going to, doing master's programs. And, the data sciences are good. Data scientists are still hard to find, but there are a lot of data scientists out there, right? Which is a good sign. Right? It means there's real value here. It means that things are progressing in terms of our ability to do more advanced problems. So that's really a positive. Second, the hard thing beyond getting the data scientist was then having the data scientist build a successful model, right? And I think that we've gotten now a lot more experience. Auto ML capabilities have become pretty standard and ubiquitous. So if I want to be able to train a model, I don't necessarily have to have a PhD, in statistics or, numerical computation or something like that. I can, as a reasonably proficient practitioner, I can build very good models that will stand up at the top of the stack in Kaggle competitions and things like that. So there's a really good, I think, baseline now of people who can do the work and of technology that can help them do the work much more efficiently and frankly, and sometimes better. So it's sort of then switched the lens back to, okay, wait a second, what is the hard problem? The hard problem is getting the right data, understanding the data, and understanding the business problem, right? Which is kind of interesting because in the early days, that's still the core business. Ask is like, hey, I need you to answer these questions, come up with predictive models, do categorizations, help me with my risk analysis, right? And people would say, okay, and then they would go off and work on all the technology stuff, right? And now the technology stuff is actually up leveled and it's gotten powerful to the point that we can spend a lot more time on that fundamental set of business problems. So I think that's a great progress right there.
Mm-hmm. I love how you're talking about things 5 years ago where things are today. I'm kind of curious about, as you think about roles that will be needed in the next 5 years. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of cross training, right? So today there's even though you'll see technology starting to bridge roles, if you're like a BI analyst and maybe you got some SQL skills, you're not right now ready to step in and play the role of data scientist. And frankly, interestingly enough, a lot of data scientists aren't very good with SQL, right? They, happy with Python, doing a lot of, data munching through scripts, and then kicking off, a lot of API driven work from a modeling perspective. I think you're going to see a lot more cross pollination there. So skill set wise, I think there's going to be an evolution, and I think in both directions. That doesn't mean you won't have specialty data scientists, or you won't, all business analysts are going to be data scientists. I think that's probably never going to happen. But I think you are going to see a lot more cross pollination there, and it kind of maybe even an evolution into a new role. Today a lot of times what I'll see is there's a business analyst group. They've got a they've got a guy or a woman on the team who's out there kind of doing stuff with data science, right? But they tend to be an outlier. I think you'll see like an Venn diagram. You'll see more overlap occurring between those worlds, which will also drive the technologies together, especially at a platform level. I know we're investing a lot in that direction, from the data science cloud service and all the machinery around that, kind of being seamlessly integrated with our analytics portfolio. And I imagine other vendors will move in the same direction. I think the other thing that's interesting is software developers. We definitely believe that if you look out, say, 5 years, that machine learning algorithms and machine learning models, trained algorithms, will wind up driving quite a bit of application logic. We're already doing that in our packaged apps, so we deliver, HR applications or Salesforce management applications or customer relationship management. We're doing a lot behind the scenes with machine learning now, so a customer can take that, they can benefit from it. But I think in the enterprise, a lot of bespoke applications will be running models behind the scenes. So today, that's kind of a mess, right? How do you bring those worlds together? Because they have very different life cycle, it's very different disciplines. I think you're going to see an evolution where there's quite a bit more intersection between what happens at the level of application development and then also in data science. Now, partially, I think the problem is going to be facilitated or solved by frameworks at the infrastructure level. So I can put a model on the production. I can allow that model to be monitored, and I can detect when its predictive efficacy is declining, or its recommendations are going south. The people responsible for the machine learning infrastructure may reconstitute it automatically, republish it in a way that's transparent to the application. But that's kind of like a new paradigm for most application developers. So, they're going to have to think about the way this impacts the entire life cycle and design of their application. And also, frankly, how they can tell if things go wrong with the models, because we can't always rely on the data science team or machine learning ops team to pick up when there's changes in a model or changes in the data set that may be influencing the application in the wrong way. I think those two worlds will come together as well. Again, not total overlap. You're not going to have, your average application developer is not going to turn into a data scientist anytime soon, nor should they, right? But you're definitely going to see a convergence here, and there'll be people whose careers are formed and live in the middle of that convergence.
Do you think with those new types of roles that there'll be also maybe some new leadership positions in the C-suite? Because we have the I think the chief data officer is probably within the last 5 years.
Yeah. That's a good question. And I got to tell you, I don't know the answer to it. Chief data officer tends to often be coming out of the data analytics side of the business and so forth. And I think especially when you start to look at applications, machine learning, it's probably a very different persona. How that will influence the architecture of the C-suite, actually, I haven't actually thought about. So rather than make some of that ends up being horribly wrong,
as you're talking,
I'll admit that that's going to be a good thing for me to think about tonight.
I was thinking like a chief model officer.
Well, who knows? I mean, it's clear though that especially on the machine learning side, the AI side, that there's going to be a lot of touch points. And making sense of and keeping track of those touch points and helping organizations deal with them effectively is going to be an important part of a lot of organizations.
Mm-hmm. Are you at all involved on the data ethics side around like how this data is being used in the organization?
I'm not personally, so I'm not doing any active work in that area. I mean, certainly we talk about. We talk about it a lot, and we get questions about how do we help with compliance and that kind of thing. But I've not been doing any active work there. But again, that's another hot area, right? It's like these worlds are going to come together in ways that companies are going to have to manage very carefully.
One of the big questions we have in our communities is always around getting a job as a data scientist or working on a data team. And I'm wondering, as you are bringing people on to work on your team, I was curious about some of the things you're looking for, characteristics in a person that would go and thrive and be successful on your team.
Yeah, so I'll tell you, the way we've been going after data scientists is frankly is not somebody who's there aren't people who've been doing it for 20 years, right? By and large, most they've got good data mining experience for sure. That's especially in retail. Retail's a segment where you get people who can make a relatively straightforward transition into other domains and apply some of the ideas they've had through a lot of data mining projects. But a lot of times we're assuming we're not going to get people with a ton of experience. We are looking for a combination, though, of have you been able to get in and do your first data science project somewhere successfully as evidence that they can think through the problem domains. They understand, we'll do a lot of screening on, what work have they done, what frameworks have they worked with, how do they think about a problem. We'll give them, sample problems. And we are working with like the lead data scientist on our data science platform team from applied data science perspective. He's PhD level guy, so we do look for people who've done reasonable amount of academic work around domains related to data science. These are probably the chief measures we've used right now. But it doesn't. I mean, I'll just be clear. Every data science role you're looking for, we're not expecting you got a PhD. There's lots of jobs out there that if you technical mind, you know how to think about statistics, and you've showed up that you can roll up your sleeves and do good work. It may be a great fit for our organization, and I assume for most. Now that's a bit different than it was. Again, go back 5-6 years. There was a particular web retailer with brick and mortar stores, but also a web presence in San Francisco I was working with, and they were hiring in PhDs. There may be numerical computing, may have been statistics, it may have been flat out just straight data science, but they were hiring these folks in, and they would come into their organization, and after about 6 months, they get on the radar of Google, and then Google would hire them out for twice as much. So it's not in the interest of most organizations to be trying to compete with a company like Google with the same expertise. So I think in general, you want some people that are very strong leaders that can kind of help the team move up the curve maturity wise. But it's okay, to have people start at a pretty close to the ground floor level as well.
What do you look for, like when you're handed a resume? And I'm just curious about some things that maybe would make somebody stand out to you when you have 3 resumes and they all have very similar technical backgrounds.
It's often not the tech they've used in this domain as much as the problems they've tackled. Because that's where it really gets into interesting. And you can tell oftentimes we do the interview, was this person really driving, decision making? Were they really understanding what was happening, or were they kind of an auxiliary role? But I think for us, it's even more so than the specific technologies you've used. It's how do you think about the problem domain you were presented with? How did you approach it? What did you do wrong? What did you learn from your mistakes? How could it have been more efficient? Those are the conversations that I think actually tend to show the most value. Of course, we do technical tests and screening and all that.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like that's in some ways the easy part. And what really gets us interested in is, how effective is this person going to be when they're put down in front of an actual real world problem? This is similar to, we were saying earlier that things have shifted quite a bit in the sense that I don't want to say it's easy, but it's easier to do a reasonable job of producing a model. So we're really looking, what's your aptitude now to think about the problem domain and think about the data, think about problems with the data, gaps in the data, et cetera. And then how does that apply to what you're going to do from a modeling perspective? So those are kind of where we're starting to steer more and more of the discussions, at least around the data science.
I love that your focus on getting somebody who's also just hyper curious, asking really good questions. How important is humility?
That's a hard one. For me, that's a good one. It's at the end of the day, we're dealing with a domain which is essentially quantitative, and so the work that people produce is typically measurable. So you're either able to demonstrate that you're doing things that make sense, or you're not. Where the humility part comes in, I think, is more on how well does this person work with a team and with other stakeholders in the business, right? And again, like you're moving the person more into the problem domain, they really need to be able to work well with other people, including people who are not going to be data scientists, right? And they may not understand what the heck you're talking about when you start dropping into the language of data science beyond a certain level. So that to me, for a lot of organizations, is probably a key corollary to a sense of humility. And I think the people who want to come into an organization, the right way to come in is I want to make the organization successful, not that I want to show off or want to make myself successful. I think honestly, I think that's true for anything in software, general software development domain or whatever. I always tell people as they move up the curve from a career perspective, it's got to be less and less about you. You'll do well. You'll get promotions or whatever to the extent that you're able to make other people successful. And I think that's a lot. That's a key element of. It's like an irony or paradox in some sense, because the better you are going to be as an executive, the less you're going to rely on some of the characteristics that maybe helped you kind of get ahead and jockey ahead of other people early in your career. And I've certainly seen, there are certainly exceptions to the rule. We've egomaniacs in every level of any organization, so and certainly in executive context, you definitely have people who, struggle with that kind of thing. But, as a rule, where I see like the people I'd want to work with, they're not there for themselves. They've kind of moved past that, so to say. Does everybody do that? No. Would it be ideal if they did? Yes, I think so.
That's fascinating. What are some of the things that you think have served people really well in the beginning, but as they moved up the ranks and moved into leadership positions,
so that's one. I'll tell you another one, which is I struggle with this. Here's one I struggle with quite a bit. Is I spent a lot of years as an individual contributor working in distributed systems. I cut a lot of code. I still my retirement plan is to go back to coding. So I really enjoy it, and I think I do a good job at analyzing system design, system architectures. Working with other engineers. The problem is, as you move up the curve, you really got to get to a point where you're not doing all that. You can't scale it effectively, right? So you got to figure out how you back away from that. Find other people that can do your job well. Maybe they don't do it in your own judgment as well as you think you might be able to, but at some level, it doesn't matter, right? Again, you got to be building up these other people and making them successful. Yeah. Otherwise, your ability to go beyond a team of dozens of people to hundreds of people to thousands of people, it just won't work, right? It's like you got to be able to take the lessons you've learned and the understanding you've got in those more hands-on, intimate roles, but you got to figure out how you scale it up in a way that you let go. And I've seen a lot of people, especially on the tech side. I think more than anything on the tech side, people struggle with that quite a bit.
Yeah, that's like a super hard. Those transitional periods are really hard when you're like you're needing to lead a team, and then you're also an individual contributor. Like you have to be doing kind of both those roles. That's all very hard spot to be.
Yeah. In. Well, for folks that actually stay in an IC role in a large org, again, you may have more flexibility to jump in and do stuff yourself because you're not tied to all the management side of life that just sucks the bandwidth out of you. But even there still, I look at that senior leader's role is really to find other senior leaders, plug them in and make sure they're empowered. Obviously, you want to find ways to collaborate and checkpoint, make sure people are doing the right things. But even as a senior IC, as you move up in an organization, I think it becomes significantly less about you doing the work and you doing everything, you figuring out, and you're more helping the organization to get those muscles built up and the right people in place to function. And especially in either role, you're not going to be there forever, right? I mean, you may move into a different role in your company or in a different company. You may get promoted, you may get pushed aside. Who knows, right? So you also want to be thinking about like what is this organization? What happens to this organization without me? Right? Where you see the weaknesses that you may have been filling in on, if you're not there, you're not going to be filling in on them. Right? So,
Greg, did you know early on that you wanted to move into leadership roles?
not really. It's there was a point in time where I moved in a direction toward running larger organizations. But it was a byproduct of doing some entrepreneurial stuff that didn't work out. And I was freaked out about all the stuff I didn't understand about venture capital term sheets. And I got the idea that, I'd pick up an MBA. So I went and did that, and I got done the MBA, and it was like, okay, what do I do with this now? So I kind of started to move in the direction of running businesses. I think one thing, again, it makes sense to me over the course of a career to be flexible about moving between different kinds of roles because certain strengths atrophy. Spend some time kind of rebuilding them up, I think, is healthy. Parlaying different experiences in different directions, I think they're healthy things. So I would say, a career plan, maybe it would work, but I think it's more about finding ways to add value. And then doing what you can to make the organization successful. And then, that should build a career, at least in my view, the kind of career falls out of that.
If someone on your team approached you and said, Greg, I really want to move into a leadership role, what advice would you give that person?
I would start to lead by doing, how do you, and again, so much of it comes down to helping the success of the org, helping the success of the team. Maybe it means taking on some additional stuff. Maybe it means mentoring. Maybe it's in a tech role, it's architecture and a data science role. It's helping the team up level. I mean, so we talked a little bit about like big data went through this transformation. With data science, there's still a problem of organizations don't know how to make data scientists successful. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times data scientists will grab data, put it on a laptop, they'll do interesting things. But they're off in their own little silos. And that's, like I say, in this Gen 2 approach, what we've tried to do with our platform is say, look, our data science service is about empowering teams of data scientists to work together. Now, you could choose to come work on Oracle's data science platform. That would be great too. But finding ways to make data scientists come together as a team, to work collaboratively, to understand how they measure success, to mature the processes around that. I think an infrastructure component is important, but I think it's also an opportunity on the data science side for folks to kind of up level their value to the organization. And that can really be a good stepping stone overall.
Well, Greg, I want to thank you so much for being on Data Talk. Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. For those that want to keep up with you, your conference schedule, things you're writing, what's the best way for them to do that?
I think usually there's something shows up that you can Google. Oracle PR puts it out there like that. I haven't been using Twitter actively, so maybe I need to get back to that. That's a good point, to just kind of let people know what's going on. I usually will put something on LinkedIn for people who are connected to me if I'm going to be talking or visiting somewhere. But this seems like a good reminder to start using Twitter. But we will be putting stuff out through Oracle social media channels for sure.
Greg, thank you so much for being on Data Talk.
Yep, thank you for having me. Great, that's a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Data Talk. We share out new episodes every single week, and you can find the full catalog of previous episodes as well as YouTube videos by going to the Experian News blog. The URL is just experian.com/datatalk. And as always, we love hearing from our community. So if you have any comments or suggestions for future shows, please reach out. You can find us on Twitter at Experian Data Lab, or you can always reach out to me directly. My email is michael.delgado@experian.com. Take care, and we'll chat next week.